Bonsoir, chers collègues. Welcome, Dr. Elkhoury. First of all, we would like to thank you for being here with us tonight. If you may, I'll introduce you to our colleagues, especially the new ones who weren't with us on Tuesday. So Dr. Elkhoury is the team lead of the Alternative Assessment Project. She is an assistant professor at Athabasca University, Canada. She has extensive experience in teaching and learning K-12 and higher education settings with both Canada and internationally. Her work focuses on education in emergency and innovation in teaching and learning. Her latest work includes training teachers in alternative ways of doing assessment. Dr. Elkhoury has received multiple grants to conduct research and has published and presented on STEM education, equity, and alternative assessment. Her current research interests include innovation in teaching and learning, alternative assessment in multiple disciplines, faculty of development, and teacher education. Welcome, Dr. Elkhoury.
Thank you. I hope you are all ready to talk about artificial intelligence and alternative assessment. I am excited to share my presentation with you. Okay, so as you all know or have experienced, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. They started with ChatGPT, and now there's a lot of them, hundreds of them that do different things. I'm going to start by saying that for me, this is really exciting, and it's not scary. It's interesting, it's exciting, and it actually changes the way that we do things. Maybe we need to think about different ways to do things. So my presentation today is very practical. I'm going to give you around 27, 28 examples of things that you can do, of ways to think about using artificial intelligence and why. Why would you do that instead of the traditional ways of doing assessment? So there's a disclaimer. I want to start with a disclaimer to talk about pedagogical values and priorities, because I believe that when you are taking a decision about what to teach or about how to assess, it is related to your values about knowledge, your values about your career, your values about your students. So what you want them to know and how. And for me, the values that we work on are thinking about what kinds of thinking and writing we want our students to do in the age of artificial intelligence. So in, let's say in 10 years, when your students have graduated already and they finished university, they finished college, what will they be doing? Are they going to use artificial intelligence or not? Probably they will. Probably they will use also other stuff that are more evolved than ChatGPT. So what am I preparing them for? One, what type of skills do we want them to develop? And we're going to talk about this more. And what skills are they missing out on when they delegate tasks to ChatGPT? Let's say I am asking them to do a task. I am asking them to write an essay, and they prepare a draft using artificial intelligence. What are they losing there? It's similar to the argument that we say that when I teach the students to type on the laptop, then they miss the skill of writing, of handwriting. So this is something that we also need to think about. And when we do this, we need to think that these skills, are they important or not? So let's say our students have a bad handwriting. Does it make a difference? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Or maybe I'm saying that my students don't spend time researching. Like, for example, the students that are coming now, and I think about my own kids, they probably don't know how to use an encyclopedia. The book, the encyclopedia that I grew up using, probably my students or my kids or the next generation will never see an encyclopedia that is books and will never know how to search without something that is indexed. So it's not important because they can search in a different way. So these are things that I want you to keep in mind. What skills do we want our students to learn? What what skills are important and what skills are not really important or will not be really important in a few years. And I'm not going to answer this question. I do not have the answer because it depends on your topic. It depends on your own discipline. So today I'm going to give you examples, and these examples are based on skills. Those skills are, I want my students to learn how to evaluate. I want my students to learn how to analyze, to justify. So they have different options, and I want them to justify why they chose one option instead of the others. I want them to explain a phenomenon. I want them to do critical thinking. I want them to compare, because this is a very important task. If my students are reading something online, I don't want them to just read it and take it in. I want them to critically think about it. I want them to compare different sources, and I want them to make a decision about this. Also, I want them to do social learning. So if they are in a setting with other people, I want them to learn from these other people. Even if they are online and they are on social media, I want them to learn from these people. So how do I develop these tasks? And this goes to every discipline. So if they are doing science, I want them to, when they read something, I want them to learn from it. I want them to know why this person wrote this topic and why not, and what can you learn from it? How can you compare it? How can you evaluate it? I want them to learn the communication. I want them to learn to make connections, to collaborate with others, to transfer the knowledge that I'm teaching them. I want them to be empowered. And because when they go to university, I want them to know that they are empowered, they have an identity, and they can make choices. They can do self-directed learning. I want them to be able to create something, and I want them to be able to take something and personalize it, no matter what that thing is. Let's say an art piece, or let's say they have a design for a house. I want them to take that design and personalize it. I want them, if they are writing code for computer science, I want them to take that code and personalize it to make something that is unique to them. And I want them to learn how to be engaged, because if you read about academic integrity and if you read about cheating, you will see that there are multiple reasons for cheating. One of them, and one of the most important ones, is engagement. Students are not engaged with the assessment. They're not engaged with the topic. So they go and they look for other resources to solve their assessment. So I want my students to develop those skills. And this is why I am excited about artificial intelligence, because it helps me. And these are two more skills that I want them to develop with artificial intelligence. The first one is the skill of collaborating with artificial intelligence, because it's not the enemy. It's there, it's evolving, it's becoming more prevalent, it's everywhere. So how do they collaborate with it? In a meaningful way, not just copy paste something and give it to you. I want them to learn to reject that idea that, okay, artificial intelligence is there, I can use it to give me ideas, and I can collaborate with it to make something better, to make me better as a student too. And I want them to develop the skill of critiquing the artificial intelligence output. And I think you would agree with me that this is really important in every topic that I'm teaching. I'm teaching them sociology, I'm teaching them economics, geography, history. Like if a student in grade 11 submits a question to ChatGPT about history, and then ChatGPT answers, remember that ChatGPT is mostly for English language speakers. So it's based on a certain way of demonstrating knowledge, and on certain topics. So I want my students to critique that answer. I want them to know that this is not correct, and this is wrong, and this is biased, and this is racialized. So how do they critique these? Those are skills that I'm going to give you examples on how they can use it. Also, important things, and those go back to alternative assessment, a choice. When I'm talking about students in 2023 and students in 2025 and 2030 and 2040, those students will have more choice. They can tell you, I don't want to learn this, or I want to learn this, or this topic is not important. Or I have students that send me emails telling me, I have, for example, 5 readings that they have to do. And I have one student who sent me an email saying, why did you choose those 5 readings? I think you should add this one. So I want my students to have this voice. I want them to have this choice. I want them to be my partners because it's not only on me. I think you might agree as teachers that there's partnership. I have a responsibility and they have a responsibility too. So when I give them that responsibility, they become my partners in their own learning, and then they take responsibility and they can learn better. Also scaffolding. So I talked about this before for the people who were here last time. Scaffolding, I'm not doing one assessment, one exam that is 70% and it's 2 hours, 3 hours. They sit and they sweat and they do the exam. It's scaffolding. I have multiple checkpoints where they come and they can ask me questions. I can give them feedback, and then they learn from this process, because my goal is to get them to learn from the assessment, not only to give them a grade. Also self-directed learning. I want my students to be independent, to lead their own learning. I want them to develop metacognition, and you will see I will put a lot of reflection, because if they do, if I tell them, okay, go write an essay or solve this problem, the learning doesn't happen when they are solving the problem. The learning happens when they reflect on that process. And finally, there's a thing called now wicked problem. These wicked problems exist now, and they will exist more later. For example, sustainability, and what do we do about nature? What do we do about culture? How do we combat racism? So these are big problems, and there's big problems in education too. And when I do alternative assessment, I want my students to be involved in this. So now, the exciting stuff. Theory is over. Let's talk about examples. The first example it's related to justify. So at the bottom of every slide, you will see that I have something in brackets, and this is the skill that I am helping my students develop. So the first one is you can use artificial intelligence, no matter what it is, because it could be ChatGPT or it could be anything else. You can ask students to justify why they chose a certain idea from a variety of ideas that ChatGPT generates. So in this example, I'm asking my students to go ask the bot, which is ChatGPT, to generate different ideas. And then I am telling them to choose one idea, but they have to justify why they chose that one idea. And this could be in all topics. Let's say I am talking to them about chemistry or biology, and I have an open-ended question that I'm asking them, and they can go to the bot and ask for different answers and then choose one, and then come and submit their choice with a reflection on why did they choose this topic? Why did they choose this answer? Remember, we always say we don't have to ask the students to use ChatGPT all the time. So I can give them the option. You can use artificial intelligence, or if you don't want to use it, you don't have to use it. You can do something else. And this goes back to choice, because some students might not feel comfortable. Some students don't have internet. Some students don't want to give their email address to ChatGPT, so they don't want to use it. You can give them the choice of doing either or. And this goes for every other option that I'm going to present. You can give the students the option of working with it or not. So the first one, justification, they can go get, and remember, every time you submit something with ChatGPT, it gives you a different answer, and every answer is different from the other. So they can take 5 answers and choose one of them and tell you why. The second one, you can ask students to explain inaccuracies, gaps, and missing aspects of a topic. And here, the skill that they are developing is evaluation. For example, let's say you can tell them life in the 1800s was better than life now, or there was more rights for human beings then. So they can get the answer, and then they can say, okay, this was inaccurate. Or for example, why did the crisis happen in 2008 in the United States? They can get the answer, and you know that artificial intelligence or ChatGPT as a language learning model, it's built on input from the internet. So of course it has inaccuracies, of course it has gaps, and students can fill those gaps from things that they have studied at school. And these can come from economics, they can come from sociology, and they can come from any topics that you are teaching them. I'm sure once you think about this, you will find examples that you can use in your own classroom. The third one is you can ask the students to improve the output. For example, let's say you ask them, ChatGPT a question about sociology or a topic in sociology, let's say poverty. They can take the answer and improve it. How would you improve it? First, remember that every student will get a different answer. Or what you can do is you can get the answer and then give it to the students and ask them to improve it. Or you can get one answer, or let's say you can get 5 answers and put the students in groups of 2 or groups of 3, and then ask them to improve it as a group. And of course, when I'm talking about improving, there's multiple things here. We're talking about improving the language. For example, let's say you are teaching them French, or you are teaching them English or Arabic or Spanish or any language. They can improve the grammar, they can improve the language, or they can improve the content, they can improve the inaccuracies, they can improve the resources that are used. For example, let's say all the resources that were used or all the things that were cited in this paragraph come from a North American area. Let's say, for example, this is something that we use and I work with my students, that when they are using examples, when you ask Google, for example, for examples, it might give you a lot of examples that are coming from the US. And as students in Canada, I always ask them to look for examples in Canada or compare the examples that you are giving with examples in Canada or with your own context. And this is something that you can do if your students are, they have an answer that they need to improve. One of the improvement could be a culturally relevant improvement. So let's say you are asking them even, let's say physics or chemistry, and they are talking about a certain product that is found, for example, in France, but your students are not in France now. So they need to find an example that is culturally relevant, that is similar, but culturally relevant, or maybe that is different. And they can say that whatever this bot created is does not apply in our context now. So these are things to think about. Number 4, students grade the bot's output using your rubric. So you have a rubric that you use for assessment or grid évaluation, and you can get an output from the bot, and then you ask the students to use the rubric to grade it. And they can grade it and they can give feedback. So for example, let's say your computer science students ask the bot for a code, and it gives them a code so they can evaluate this code. Is it correct? Does it work? What's missing? So using this rubric, they can evaluate it. Or for example, your art students or graphic design students, they can evaluate a piece of art. Or even your language students, they can grade an essay that was created by the bot using your rubric. So they take the rubric, and then you can even go further and ask them to give feedback. So this is the rubric. Your essay deserves a B because you have 3 missing areas, and this is the feedback that you can use to improve. Number 5, you can use artificial intelligence to annotate. So the previous example was about evaluation and improving, putting grade. Now you annotate. Let's say Same example. You have a code written by computer science students. Students can go in and annotate it. By annotated, I mean they can put a comment. And this annotation could be done, for example, on a PDF, on a Google Doc, if you want it to be a social annotation. So multiple students can go and annotate one code. And then, of course, Google Doc will show you how this is annotated. You can also, composition students or English or language students, they can annotate an essay or a paragraph for content or for language. Economy students can annotate a case study. Science students can also annotate a case study, saying that, okay, this is the answer here, or this works, this doesn't work. What if we add this? What if we add this element? What if we add this example? And what do you evaluate? I'm sure you can ask yourself, what do I evaluate? What do I give a grade on? This annotation, you can ask every student to give you a report about the annotation and about how the annotation helped them learn. So let's say there's a annotation on an economic case. Students can say that this is what I thought, and this is what I learned. This is what my Tony, my student, my colleague, this is what he wrote. Alex, this is what Alex wrote, and then this is what I replied, and this is what I learned from them. So this report will show you how much your students learned. Number 6, peer assessment is where students can assess other students and where students can give feedback to other students. And this is not an easy task, and sometimes our students are not used to it. So you can use artificial intelligence as a first step. You can help them practice peer feedback and peer review and peer assessment through AI. So instead of the first step being a peer review for their colleagues, and some students, they feel intimidated. So the first time I did peer assessment, I felt bad. So I said to my colleague that, oh, your paper was great, but it was not great. But I did not want to give feedback because I did not know how. And so you can remove the step by asking the students to give peer review to the bot's output. And here they can practice. You can give them feedback on their feedback, and they practice how to give constructive feedback. They can practice how to avoid using offensive language, or even they can avoid being nice to their colleagues, because they learn that peer assessment actually helps their colleagues. 7, you can ask the students to evaluate logic, consistency, and accuracy. And here also there's another layer of when using artificial intelligence, something created by artificial intelligence. It could be correct, it could be incorrect. So students can go in and evaluate that. They can tell you, oh, the answer that was provided was correct, but it was missing something, or it was totally incorrect, and I had to go look at 5 different websites to find the correct answer. And then they tell you where they found the correct information and how did they determine that this correct information is correct. Let's say, for example, they are talking about volcanoes. They are talking about fires, wildfires, or they are talking about forests. So there's a lot of information on the internet. And when the artificial intelligence bot creates something for you, they pick and choose. So they picked, for example, 5 different elements, and then they created a paragraph out of it as an answer for you. But this answer is not 100% correct. So ask your students to evaluate it. Is it logical? Is it consistent? Is it accurate? Is it culturally relevant? And then they can submit this. This will help them also look for other sources of information. You are helping them become self-directed. You are helping them become independent. Ask your students to perform fact-checking. And this is we have a course. I worked with an instructor. It was a first-year students in biology courses. And all they did all year were projects based on fact-checking, because the instructor noticed that students, they didn't have the skill. They didn't have the skill to determine what is correct and what is not correct, especially now with the internet and social media and artificial intelligence and all of these things. There's a lot of wrong information, whether disinformation or misinformation, and it's all out there. And she wanted her students to learn how to do fact-checking. So just a point, when I say misinformation and disinformation, those are two different things. So the first one is information that is just spread, that is wrong, but it's just spread. People think that it is correct. Disinformation is people who spread wrong information on purpose. So these are two different topics, and they happen in different contexts. And students need to be aware of this, and they need to develop those skills. So you can ask your students to perform fact-checking in science. I can think of a million examples in biology, in chemistry, in physics, in geography, in any topic, in math. There's a lot of wrong information out there. There's a lot of lies. So how do we help our students learn? On social media, in economy, there's a lot of lies. Like there's a lot of things that even, for example, I was talking to somebody about how much does the royal family in the UK cost the government or cost the country, and I did not know that they actually make income because they have lots of properties. So now they manage these properties, and then people come in and to look at this property and they rent them, so they can actually have income, which I did not know that they had income. I thought that they only live of money that they collect. So they do have income, and then they pay taxes on this income. So this is something that I didn't know, and it's also fact-checking for me. In history, there's a lot of misinformation, and here in Canada, there's a lot of people that have been treated as important in history, but now they are removing them. For example, they are removing their statues. They are removing their significance, or they are changing their significance. They are changing the names of schools because the people who they were named after were, for example, slave owners. So we don't want to honor these people. So they are changing the names of schools. And students can do fact-checking on this and on sociology, on any topic. So when you can sit with yourself and you can start thinking, what are lies or what are misinformation, what are disinformation that exists out there and that I want my students to learn to fact-check. And you can ask your students to create an output from artificial intelligence, and then they go and fact-check what artificial intelligence said. Number 9, you can ask your students to create 3 versions of answers to the same question and then analyze the differences between them. As I mentioned before, artificial intelligence, the chatbot, will not give you 2 similar answers. There's always different versions. So students can get 3 versions and then compare them and analyze them. Or you can even create those 3 versions and ask the students to compare them. Another version of this, you can ask the students to create 3 different versions while changing the main characters. For example, there was an experiment that was done, and it says they give the artificial intelligence the prompt saying that you are a woman and you want to fire someone. Write an email to fire someone. You are a man and you want to fire someone, so write an email to fire someone. So this is a very simple example. Of course, you can change it based on what you are teaching. But what we are doing here is we are changing the characters. And they noticed that the email that was written by the woman and the man, the theoretical personalities, were different. So imagine you can ask the bot to create, for example, a letter by a black boy in the 18th century to his parents, explaining what was he doing all day, and a letter by a white boy. And then students can compare these differences and then see what was happening then. Or resources, for example, a letter written by a woman in the village in the 18th century about how her day was going, and then a letter written by a man in the city, or a woman in the city, or a woman in science. What did she write in the 18th century, in 17th century? Were there women in science? If they were women in science, what would they write? What would they have written? Number 10, also analyze. You can ask students to generate debate entry points of view and debate them in the class. So for example, you have a question, let's say vaccines are good or vaccines are not good. Are vaccines good for humanity? And then they can go to AI and ask for entry points. Let's say, give me 3 entry points about why vaccines are good, and give me 3 entry points why vaccines are bad. And then they can use these to debate in the classroom. Also, they can ask this for a point of view of different personalities. For example, they can say, write, why is vaccine good from a point of view of a low socioeconomic person? So a poor person. Or for example, lockdowns, were lockdowns good? Write an entry point from the point of view of a poor person and from the point of view of a rich person. So then they have different points of view, they have different examples, and they can come to the classroom and have a debate. Another layer you can put is they can get these entry points, they can get together as a team of 2 or a team of a group, and then they can discuss these entry points and decide which ones they are going to use, and then they can have a debate. After the debate, they can submit a reflection on their learning, on what happened during that. So I'm just giving you multiple examples. Remember that not everything will work for your context. Some things will work, some things, one idea will work, one idea not. Sometimes one idea will work at the beginning of the year or at the end of the year. So what I'm saying here is keep an open mind and just pick and choose what works for you and for your classroom. Number 11, you can involve the students to, as for example, ask them to develop criteria to assess GPT's output. So let's create a rubric together. Let's create a science rubric together or a math rubric together for the output that AI is going to produce. How are we going to assess this? So instead of you creating the rubric, the students are creating it. They have to think, what type of language is good? What type of content is good? And you can also ask the students how they would like to use the bot in their assessment. So let's say, how do you want to use ChatGPT or not? How do you want to use it? As an idea generator, as a debate entry point? So they will tell you how they want to use it. They will tell you how they were using it, and then you can learn from them. And here I'm talking about partnership. You can use this, you ask the students to compare text generated by the bot to their own text. So for example, tell them write a text and then produce a text by the bot and then compare it. This is, of course, in all disciplines. They can also compare text generated by the bot to authentic text. For example, you have Shakespeare books, and then they can go and ask, for example, to write a text by Shakespeare, ask the bot to write a text by Shakespeare, and then they can compare them. Or poetry. They can compare the poetry created by the bot to the authentic text, or the news. So they can ask artificial intelligence to write a news piece about a volcano or a war or a battle, and then they can compare these and reflect on it and submit a reflection. You, as an instructor, can generate a bot's response and ask the students to socially annotate. I talked about this before. So, for example, you put it on Google Doc. They can all annotate at the same time. And they can learn from this annotation to revise the bot's response. So they can take this annotation, take the original text that you submitted, and then revise it and submit a new one based on these responses. This is what I do. I ask my students to, I have an assignment called glossary, and my students have to create definitions of different terms. and then they have to comment on each other's definitions. And then they have to submit a final definition that includes feedback from their colleagues. So this is an example of this. You can ask the students to write a reflection of that experience while quoting their colleagues. So for example, my friend, my colleague X wrote this, and I agree with them or I don't agree with them. And I changed the original response based on that. This is social learning. As I mentioned, there's a lot of equity issues, and most of the text generated by artificial intelligence, they don't acknowledge the equity issues. So you can ask the students to analyze gender differences, to analyze biases, to analyze dangerous stereotypes, to analyze racism. So depending on what you want to teach them, they can do that. They can identify cultural assumptions. So for example, let's say you ask ChatGPT to create an output, an essay or a paragraph, and this paragraph definitely has cultural assumptions. So let's say it's assuming that you live in France, or that you live in the US, or that you live in Canada, but you don't actually live there. You live somewhere else. You live in Côte d'Ivoire. So these cultural assumptions don't work there. So students can identify them and then add to that output and tell you why and how they would fix it. This is different. Here, you can tell the students that they can use ChatGPT as a personal quizzer. So they can go in and ask ChatGPT to quiz them on a certain topic. So ChatGPT would give them a question, then they would give an answer, and then they would have this discussion. But what's nice about this is that you can ask the students to submit a report on that experience. So ChatGPT did the quiz, asked them, for example, 5 questions or 10 questions. And the students noticed that they did not know the answers. So they went back to the book and they looked for answer. Or they noticed that ChatGPT's answer was different from what the teacher said in the classroom. So this is what happened and what they started to think about. Can you imagine how exciting this would be? Of course, we are teaching our students to become critical thinkers. So it might take some time, but it's exciting. Imagine a student, when they finish the school, they have developed this skill of being critical. And then they go to university and then they are great citizens, right? Do you use think, pair, share in your activities? So students, they think by themselves, then they can get together, discuss a topic, and then they share it with the classroom. You can include ChatGPT as an element. So there's different variations that you can do. So for example, students can think, then they can pair up, then they can get the answer from ChatGPT, then they can pair and discuss the answer again, and then they can share it with the classroom. Some other instructors say that instead, they can start with ChatGPT and then they can think, they can pair, they can share. So you can do multiple variations on this. And it's important to note here that usually your students they come from from the same context, or from the same demographic, or from the same sociocultural background. So when they get input from ChatGPT, this is a different context that they are getting input from. And this adds to their critical thinking. So it's not something that it's the same sociocultural background that they are talking about. They might get an example from somewhere else, and this gets them thinking more. So now I gave 16 examples. What I want to talk about now is that it's important to focus on alternative assessment. So even if your students are using ChatGPT, and I know some people worry about it, and I'm not saying it's not correct to worry about it. You might be correct to think about it because you are not ready and your students are not ready. But think about it in this way, that even if they use the ChatGPT, why don't you make it about learning? So instead of focusing on the grade, you can focus on the feedback. So you can use ungrading techniques. You can, for example, organize a student conference, and then students can share with other students. They can share, if you can get together with other schools in the in the district or in the neighborhood, and then do a student conference, and then students present, and they can reflect on this, and they can submit their reflection on any topic that they are discussing. So even if they got the input from ChatGPT, even if they got the help of ChatGPT, it's okay. The most important for me is they have learned and they are able to communicate this learning. Also, remember scaffolding. So even if they use ChatGPT, I gave this example before. Let's say you give them a podcast assignment. Even if they go on ChatGPT and they collect information, they still have to put this information in a way that they can communicate with others, in a way that they can put it on a podcast. They still have to check in with you and give you an outline and defend this outline and receive feedback and change the outline. So the way they are interacting with the output, this is the most important. Plan for productive collaboration. So you can do multiple stage exams. So for example, there's different variations, but one example is you do an individual exam. So let's say they have 80% on doing the exam by themselves, and then they stop and they sit in groups, and there's 20% on what they do in groups. And it's the same questions, but then they look at them and they discuss them with their group members. So here, they did it by themselves. They thought about it by themselves, and then they did it in a team setting. So this is productive collaboration. Also interdisciplinary assessment. So get, for example, students that are taking English and taking science together to do a topic that goes through multiple disciplines. Encourage peer learning and socialization. So encourage students to quote their classmates and saying, for example, my classmate said this, and I thought this was interesting, and I included it in my definition, because we also want them to learn that when they are online and when they go to work and when they graduate, when they go to university, we want them to learn about plagiarism and acknowledging what other people have said, acknowledging what other things, what other sources, what they took from other sources, so they can practice. If you are doing reflection or forums, they can submit these reflections and put them there. Your students can interview experts. So even if they ask ChatGPT to create the questions, then they have to submit the questions to you, and you will provide them with feedback on the questions. They have to evaluate the questions that they want to interview the experts on. For example, you can ask your students in math class to go and interview math PhD students about certain questions. They have to create the question, they have to filter the questions, decide which ones, and then they need to interact with the real humans. Or they can interview ChatGPT and think about the answers that were given. I mentioned this before. So for example, it's important to create culturally relevant outputs. So if you are, no matter what you are teaching them, they can go to the community and get information from the community based on something that is relevant to them. So I also give this example a lot about chemistry and detergent that are used in cleaning, and it's different from one community to another, or from one country to another, or even pills. Like there are pills that are we cannot buy in Canada. They are not allowed. They are allowed in the US. So the composition of the pills, and it's for migraine, it's for headache. So the composition of these pills are not allowed in Canada, but allowed in the US. So why? And what are the side effects of that? And it usually contains caffeine and ibuprofen, and in Canada it's not allowed. So why? Tell us why. Tell us about the reaction that happens there. Ask your students to create visual outputs. Also, they can create concept maps, they can create timelines, they can create network representations and reflect on them. They can create a video by themselves that they are explaining, a documentary, a news flash, I know one teacher who asked the students to create a news flash every time he comes to the classroom, telling them about something new related to the topic. So this news flash was 2 minutes, and then the student would go at the front of the classroom and say, okay, today is May 18, 2023. We are going to talk about a new topic, and they would explain this new topic in 2 minutes. Involve the students in the community. So check what the community needs. It could be a local library. What do they need? A local reserve. If you are teaching them about geography, zoology, any kind of topics, the trees that exist, the birds, they can go in and take pictures and explain about them, about the dams, about the forest. So anything that is needed. Involve them in their own learning. It's very micro-learning is now very important, and courses on Coursera or online courses are also very important. So, and you are preparing your students to go to university, so they can go online, or future learn. They can go online and take one of these courses as professional development. Let's say you have a student who's interested in becoming a computer programmer or a data analyst. They can go and take a free course online, and then they can submit a reflection of how this relates to the things taught in the classroom. Make it interesting. So you can create a Shark Tank. You can get experts from your school or from the community or from other schools, and then students can create an idea of, or for example, a solution that they want to sell. And they can have the Shark Tank event, and the experts can vote, and you can put grades on these. Make it renewable. You can create a Wikipedia assignment. You can collaborate with your students to create an open access book. And this open access book could be online, and then they can say that they wrote a book with their colleagues. And multimodal, of course, instead of just doing something in written, they can do video, comic book, maps, audiovisual recording, exhibitions, websites, podcasts, digital books. Here they are learning to personalize, and they are learning to engage. Okay, so I talked a lot. I hope I gave you a lot of examples or things that you can use in your own classroom. As I said, these are things that you need to personalize. There's no recipe. There's no something that you can just take and apply in your classroom. And here I want to say that if you are interested in any of these ideas or in any of these topics, you can feel free to reach out to me. This is my email. You can send me an email, and if you want to discuss an idea that you would like to try in your classroom. Also, we have a website. We have a LinkedIn page. If you want to, I usually post different things that I find other people are doing, so different ideas, and we learn from each other. If you want to follow the page, you can go in and follow it, and then stay up to date with what other people are doing. And finally, there's a Google form here. I'm going to post the link in the chat. We are going to conduct an assessment incubator. So people who are interested in changing their assessment, they can be part of the incubator. We will provide them with one-on-one mentoring, and we will do research with them. So if you are interested in being part of this or in learning more, you can fill the form, and I will be in contact with you soon. I hope this was exciting, and you got some interesting ideas to try, and I look forward to stay connected.